Welcome to the webinar on green asset management, hosted by the Total Maximum Daily Load, or TMDL program with the North Central Texas Council of Governments, otherwise known as the NCTCOG. My name is Casey Cannon, and I'm an Environment and Development Planner with the NCTCOG, and I'm excited that y'all have joined us today. Before we get started, we have some housekeeping items that we want to cover and the procedures for today. So this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the NCTCOG TMDL webpage under the green banner labeled workshops. You can generally find all of our webinars and workshops on this URL here, nctcog.org/TMDL. All registrants and attendees will receive an email with the presentation slides and then a subsequent email when the recording is posted. So if you want to see this information an additional time, just stay posted and we will get that out to you. We do ask that you keep your microphone on mute until the question and answers period, which will be at the end of the presentations. And alternatively, you can type your questions into the chat box and we can get to those accordingly. So to start us off, I will give a brief introduction before we get into the main content. We normally like to begin with an overview of the NCTCOG region. If you aren't familiar with us, the NCTCOG is a voluntary association of local governments. We are the regional planning council for the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. We do many things at NCTCOG, but our priority is to support our local government agencies through various initiatives which are funded at the local, state, and federal levels. You can see on the map here our NCTCOG region, the 16 counties surrounding the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and we are based right in the center there in Arlington, Texas. Now, as we move forward to the main topic today, it's green asset management, which is directly related to green infrastructure. But before we get to the main topic, we want to highlight why we at COG are concerned with green infrastructure. And so on screen, you'll see a map of the Greater Trinity River region and the associated impaired segments of our watersheds in this region. For reference, there's a black line here down the middle. It might be hard to see, but this is the county line between Tarrant County and Dallas County. So on the left is Tarrant County, which is where Fort Worth is, and then on the right is Dallas County, which is where Dallas is. These watersheds, which are represented by the red outline, comprise our total maximum daily load project area and the watersheds within. If you aren't familiar with the term, the TMDL, the total maximum daily load, is basically a budget for a pollutant that a waterway can receive and still safely maintain its designated use. And then within those red watersheds, we have the purple segments. Those are the individual impaired segments. And a bit more information about our program. So we administer the TMDL implementation plan, or I-plan, for this Greater Trinity River region. You can see on the slide here the cover page for our TMDL I-plan and some of the associated impaired segments. And some more background on this. In 1996, the first bacteria impairments in our region were listed on the 303D list, which is now the Texas Integrated Report, Surface Water Quality for Clean Water Act, sections 305B and 303D. 2006, we also saw additional impairments on this 303D list. And then in 2011 and the following years, TCEQ adopted and EPA approved several TMDLs in our region here in DFW. And following that, our implementation plan was developed, and it describes various implementation strategies such as green infrastructure, among many others, but green infrastructure in the planning and development process. Now, One thing we wanted to talk about was some of our other green infrastructure initiatives outside of our TMDL program here at COG. The first one, you might have heard of it, is the Integrated Stormwater Management Program, or ISWIM. The ISWIM program is a cooperative initiative that assists cities and counties to achieve their goals of water quality protection, stream bank protection, flood mitigation, while also helping communities meet their construction and post-construction obligations under state stormwater permits. ISWIM looks to include natural areas and streams in the development process to create systems that mimic the natural environment. We also have our integrated transportation and stormwater infrastructure, or TSI program. This program is a multi-year study coordinating transportation planning, stormwater management, and environmental planning to mitigate flood risk and optimize infrastructure while supporting sustainable development.
Can I call you back?
I will remind you guys, if you can mute your mics and you can ask questions at the end.
Email or call you. All right, thank you.
So this TSI study, it will recommend tools and best practices to address community health, safety, and growth. The study is led by the NCTCOG with support from local, state, and federal partner agencies. The TSI study is expected to conclude in 2026 and will identify projects to reduce future flood risk and potential funding sources to implement those projects. And then lastly, we want to also promote our Blue, Green, Gray funding program. This program promotes the planning and construction of green or sustainable infrastructure in the region to help reduce carbon emissions, mitigate urban heat islands, reduce pollution from stormwater runoff, and provide health benefits to communities. The Blue, Green, Gray funding program focuses on breaking the silos between water infrastructure, the environment, and transportation infrastructure to help create and fund innovative spaces and solutions that combine these components. The goal of the Blue, Green, Gray program is to support innovative pilot projects that provide resources for cities and organizations to use to replicate these ideas throughout the Metroplex. And if you have any questions on our initiatives here at COG, feel free to get with me after the webinar, and I can direct you to the right resources or the right people with these programs. So with that, I think you've heard enough about us at COG for now, and we'll go ahead and jump right into the main content with our first speaker, Shannon Sloane Pepper with the Southwest Environmental Finance Center at the University of New Mexico. Shannon Sloane Pepper has been with the Southwest EFC since 2021. In her role as water utility trainer and specialist, Shannon does research, technical assistance, and training for water, wastewater, and stormwater systems. Shannon specializes in green and natural infrastructure as a method for improving water quality and reducing vulnerability to extreme weather events. She has designed and delivered a series of webinars focused on various aspects of green infrastructure, including policy challenges, equity concerns, and funding strategies. Shannon has experience finding and navigating funding for both green infrastructure and more traditional wastewater and stormwater projects, with a particular focus on clean water state revolving fund programs. She currently serves on the steering committee of the Arid LID Coalition, an Albuquerque-based network of professionals working to implement green stormwater infrastructure in the Southwest. Shannon will present on resources and methods of incorporating green infrastructure and asset management frameworks, and then a case study from the city of Tucson on asset management and maintenance. So Shannon, if you want to request control, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Casey, for that introduction. Again, my name is Shannon Sloane Pepper. I'm with the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, and we're an organization that specializes in no-cost support for water, wastewater, and stormwater systems. We work all across the U.S. in a network of other environmental finance centers, but our main focus here is in EPA Region 6, which New Mexico and Texas are both a part of. I'm calling in today from my house in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Today, I'll be talking with you about applying the practice of asset management to green water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. Let's see. control is working. There we go. There's a little bit of a lag, so we'll just have to see how this works, Casey. I might have to hand it back over to you, but we'll see. So just a quick overview of what we'll go over today. What is green and gray infrastructure? So just make sure that we're all on the same page about these kind of words that we're throwing around. How would you just describe the difference between green infrastructure and then more traditional gray infrastructure? We're also going to go through an introduction to the 5 core components of what we call integrated green-gray asset management. And I'm going to throw in some case studies from the city of Tucson. Their storm to shade program is currently implementing an asset management program, is in the early stages, and I think they're a really great example of one way to do this and to approach this. And then I'll go over a few different resources that I'd recommend if you're really curious and want to follow up on this topic. So let's get into it. All right, I think I'm getting a sense, Casey, that with this lag, I think it'll just make a little more sense for you to forward the slides if you're okay with that. I'm going to go ahead and give up my control here, and I'll just say next slide when I'm ready for you to click. Does that work for you?
Yep, sounds great.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so first of all, what is green infrastructure? Why should you care? Why is it important? So go ahead and next slide. When we're thinking about the words water infrastructure, most people will associate to things like, go ahead and click through about 6 times there, Casey. Got my animations. You might think of concrete lined drainage trenches, treatment plants, things that are primarily made from concrete and steel. But with green infrastructure, we're talking about water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure that integrates natural systems like plant growth and the water cycle and soil filtration as part of the function of the infrastructure. So beyond just bacterial and biochemical processes that would commonly be used in a wastewater treatment plant. So we're talking about things like infiltration trenches and basins, planters that are rigged up to harvest rainwater from buildings. And we're also talking about wetlands, either constructed or naturally occurring. So those are just a few examples of what I would consider green infrastructure. And from these pictures, it might seem like I'm creating some kind of dichotomy here, like green infrastructure versus gray infrastructure. But actually, in most cases, we need both types of infrastructure, and we need them to work together. So that's what I'm mainly going to be focusing on today as I walk through the integrated green-gray asset management framework. Go ahead and next slide. So let's look at some examples of green and gray infrastructure that share a similar function for stormwater and wastewater management, but look a little bit different on the ground. So sewer pipes have a function, right, of conveying stormwater away from roads and buildings. And then it has a green counterpart, which is an infiltration trench. So this is a similar function. The one that you see here on the screen is situated along a roadway, which is a really common place that we see green infrastructure installed, and why I'm really glad to hear Casey talk about that transportation program that's a part of the NCTCOG, because I think that this is a really common place that we see a need for green stormwater infrastructure. So this placement allows the plants and fungi in the trench to break down pollutants that are associated with the adjacent road. So we're talking about heavy metals and oils, things that you would generally find accumulated on roadways. And then again, this is a feature that the community can enjoy walking along. There's plants cooling the air, improving air quality, also capturing carbon, other airborne particles. Next slide. And then here's an example more related to wastewater infrastructure. So on the left here, we have a typical wastewater treatment plant. On the right is a constructed wetland. This is a photo from the city of Arcata, California. Arcata has a population of about 10,000 and treats all its municipal wastewater in a kind of combined treatment plant wetland complex. And this wetland is a wildlife sanctuary. It's home to one of the most mostly dense, diverse populations of migratory birds in California, which is pretty impressive because California is already a bird hub. And this is a combo green-gray wastewater treatment system. The primary, secondary treatment happens in a treatment plant and in oxidation ponds, and then the effluent moves through a wetland system for a final clearing and cleansing before it re-enters the Arcata Bay, or enters for the first time, I should say. Next slide. So why are we advocating for green infrastructure, which also is called many names? I've heard nature-based solutions. I've heard GSI or green stormwater infrastructure. I've heard blue-green infrastructure. Something to know is that I'm talking about a lot of the same things here. These aren't really super distinct categories. We have a lot of names for similar types of infrastructure. So go ahead and click maybe few times, 3 times through, Casey. Great, thanks. So a big reason that we are into green infrastructure is for climate resiliency. So most of our current infrastructure built with a very different idea of what a 100-year storm might look like. Here in New Mexico, I can say that looks like longer periods of drought followed by deluges of precipitation, which is far outside historical norms on both aspects. So a lot of our aging storm sewer infrastructure is not built to handle these volumes of water. And we're also losing a lot of that valuable fresh rainwater as runoff. So green infrastructure at all scales can capture and slow and filter stormwater right where it falls, which reduces the burden on treatment plants, and it also improves water quality by treating the water before it returns to the sources that we're using for drinking. Then there's also partnerships. So here in the US, in both law and right down to the community level, drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater systems are generally built and managed as separate from one another, even though, all water on Earth is part of one system, and we'll all kind of cycle through the same systems, the water cycle, right? But often there's a limited understanding of how to fund and implement green infrastructure because it demands all these different cross-disciplinary, cross-department collaborations in order to be successful. I mean, think about distributed infrastructure. You've got maybe all these different installations that fall within jurisdictions that are perhaps in a larger city separate from one another. You might have one that falls with Department of Transportation. You might have one that falls within parks, and so on. So it requires that partnership and collaboration. There's also the co-benefits. So in addition to slowing and infiltrating rainwater, there's a huge range of co-benefits for humans and wildlife, from aesthetics down to habitat creation, air quality improvement, and then more general water quality improvement, filtration, some of the things that we've been talking about. So that's why we're so interested in green infrastructure as a solution to some of our water quality concerns in a changing world. So next slide. Let's get into asset management and how it ties in. Usually when I do trainings like this, they take the full day. And this is going to be a lightning overview of the core components of asset management and the particular frameworks and considerations for managing green assets. There are lots of resources that can guide you if you're interested in this and want to delve more deeply into asset management. And I'll be sharing some of those resources at the end of the presentation. Please remember that you can ask me any questions either in the Q&A or feel free to write them down, follow up with me later. My door is open. So let's get into what asset management is and how it can help you make data-informed decisions about green and gray water, wastewater, and stormwater systems. Next slide. So you probably all know that water and wastewater and stormwater systems are usually understaffed and underfunded, and this can lead to a conflict between the time and the money that it takes to complete all the basic tasks of the system, as well as additional burdens of emergencies and available funding. The system staff have to make really tough decisions regarding the trade-off between funds and activities. And asset management is a program, a framework that helps you make those tough decisions. It is designed to help you decide how, when, and where to spend your limited funds to achieve the best results for your utility and customers. And also just say too that this is it's more of a sort of philosophy or frame of mind than it is like a software program. Like you don't have to buy anything to start asset management. It's more of a framework, a way of organizing your decisions. So next slide. We teach 5 core components of asset management at the Southwest EFC, and these 5 core components correspond to a sort of basic question about 5 basic questions about your system that are going to help you organize your decision making. So first question is, what service level do you want to provide? And Casey, if you would just click through, I think 5 times here, a bunch of little animations. So what service level do you want to provide? Level of service. What assets do you have? That's going to correspond with current state of the assets. Which assets are the most critical to providing that service? That's going to be criticality. How do you ensure that the assets do their job over their lifespans? That will be life cycle costing. And then do you have the money to get it all done? So that corresponds with the core component of long-term funding. So we're going to just kind of blast through these core components here really quick over the next half hour or so. Again, this is usually a full day training, but I just want to give you all kind of an overview of what these look like, and then also how you might apply this to your green infrastructure program. Next slide. So the level of service core component basically provides the roadmap for strategic direction for all the work that you do at your system. So you should be thinking about what kind of service level your customers want, what service you can actually provide, and then how do you measure whether you are able to provide service at that level or not. Next slide. So here are some examples of what level of service goals can look like for a system that also includes green assets. So a customer service goal might look like fewer than 2 complaints received regarding vegetation overgrowth, trash, flooding of green infrastructure per month. Because green infrastructure tends to be public facing, people will engage with it. So this is a big one, and it's big for just traditional wastewater systems, wastewater treatment plants as well, where people expect a certain level of service and might call in to complain if it's not being met. Then there's system maintenance. So a maintenance goal might look like the system will inspect and perform routine maintenance on all of your infiltration planters and rain gardens once a month. That could include weeding, mowing, unclogging, litter removal, and also pruning of any vegetation. So these are just some examples, just to kind of get the wheels turning. Next slide. Here's an applied example here from the City of Tucson Storm to Shade program. And I'm going to be referencing this program a lot throughout this presentation. I've been working with them pretty closely over the last 6 months. And they had started their green infrastructure management program back in, I believe it was 2020. So they are about 4 or 5 years into implementation of a green infrastructure asset management program. Their focus is on maintenance. So their goals look like infiltrating standing water, pruning vegetation for site visibility, mobility, access, and hazards, preserving the structural integrity of their GSI installations, and then clearing trash, invasive species, and debris. If I was going to critique these goals, I might say that they're really excellent goals, but they might want to have a little more specificity. So you want to make sure that your goals are measurable. And one way to do that is to, I think a general standard for green infrastructure is to infiltrate standing water within 24 hours of a rainfall event. That's how you know that your green infrastructure is functioning correctly. It's also going to prevent things like mosquito growth or mosquito breeding in standing water. It's also probably going to attract less public attention if it's doing what its job and infiltrating that storm water within 24 hours. So just something to think about as you think about your level of service goals. Next slide. So another core component of asset management is current state of the assets, or asset inventory. And this is the part of asset management where we basically take stock of what we already have within our systems, and that includes developing and maintaining an asset inventory. This is a central location where you store your information about each asset in your system. But there's a few key questions to consider here. First of all, how would we define an asset within our system? So for the purposes of asset management, we generally define an asset as something that has either potential or actual value to your organization. So a green asset is going to be something that is part of your system that adds value to your system. And that value could be something like water quality protection, it could be stormwater treatment, it could be public education, could be any of those co-benefits as well. Then we have a few more questions to consider. So are you going to manage all your assets, each of your assets as a whole, or are you going to break it down into individual components? Are you going to replace it as a whole asset or in those individual components? And then really most importantly, what data do you want to collect about your assets? And that's a really, really key question that you should really flesh out and decide on before you start your inventory. So let's look at those different components. Go ahead and next slide. So that you have to decide basically how granular to go with the definition of an asset. Do you want it to be a collection of parts into a whole, or should each individual asset be considered, each individual component be considered an asset? So what you see on the screen here is an example of a parent-child asset inventory. That's kind of what we call it. So parent assets are there on the left. We've got these green stormwater infrastructure installations. We've got a traffic circle. We've got a right-of-way basin. And then each of those parent assets might be broken down into smaller components like the inlets and outlets that the water comes in and leaves. It might look like a cut in the curb. It could look like one of those curb cores if you've ever seen those. The sediment trap is the rock and the riprap that is installed at the curb cut entrance to prevent erosion. Usually that's where the water is entering at the highest velocity, so you're a little more concerned about erosion if you have bare dirt there, and so on and so forth. So this is an important consideration for your asset management program. Next slide. And let's go ahead and actually, we're going to skip through this slide. I'm looking at time and I'm a little concerned about it, so let's move on to the next one. Great. So this is an example of Tucson, the Tucson Storm to Shade program work order system. So the asset inventory has to contain basic information about each asset, as much data as is useful to your system. So this is just one example of an inventory that Tucson's using to track operations and maintenance and then subsequent work order activities. The inventory is really foundational to asset management. It's where you store your data on your asset that will be essential for making those decisions about your asset and then also your system as a whole. At the bare minimum, you need to know what you have, what assets you have, where they're located, and the condition that they're in. And this is an example on the screen here of two different work order environments. They have both a mobile environment and a desktop environment. And the city of Tucson uses an asset management program. They're a big city with a big program, and they use Hexagon, the program Hexagon, to manage, and that's part of their gray water and wastewater infrastructure management systems as well, but it's just like kind of a little subset of it.
And I don't know any future of anything.
Next slide.
I'm just grateful for our dynamic that we have and our bond that we have, and whatever life does, life will do.
Okay. So the location of each asset is a really crucial piece of information that your inventory must include. And you can turn these really simple pieces of data, which are your asset coordinates or physical address locations, into a visualized map of your data. And this could be just for your internal use, or in this case, Tucson has this map available on their outward facing website to educate the public on their GSI program. So an asset inventory map could be much more functional for your system. It could be more education for the public, or it could do both, depending on the programs that you have available and what you want to do with it. Next slide. So I want to just touch on what I meant by asset conditions. So this is an important part of your asset inventory. It defines the physical state of an asset at a moment in time. So condition will help you inform you of the remaining useful life of the asset, of interventions, of maintenance that is needed, other important decisions that you need to make. So the useful life can be very different for green and gray assets. And let's look at that comparison now. Next slide. So the condition curve here is typical for a gray asset. Condition usually begins the best, it's in the best condition. As you can see, the yellow line there is telling us the condition of the asset. Dotted blue line is telling us the minimum acceptable level of condition for that asset in order for it to be functional. So we start out pretty high condition and deteriorates over time as time goes on. Line dips toward that acceptable service level. Ideally, before it hits that level, you do some work or maintenance activity, you restore that asset to like new condition, and then you have a similar kind of curve heading toward that acceptable service level. So that's a typical kind of condition curve that you might expect for a gray asset. Click through and we'll look at a green asset. So this is a little bit different, right? So when you first install a green asset, it's probably not going to be functioning at its highest capability, and that's because we're accounting for vegetation. So when you plant a plant in the ground, for those of you who work with green assets or are gardeners, you probably know that it takes a while for vegetation to take root. And those roots do more than just root the plant. They also are really important for the uptake of water. So when you first install a green asset, you're probably not going to be expecting it to perform at its highest capacity right when you install. Maybe it's just right at that minimum acceptable service level. But as those plants grow, take root, you're going to actually see an increase. If you maintain your asset well and it was designed well, you should see an increase in performance of that asset over time. And that curve is also probably going to be a lot longer. Green assets tend to be long-lived because they include those living components that will kind of self-propagate, self-reproduce as long as you're doing your maintenance on the asset. Eventually, maybe it will, the plants will start to die off. It might need some help. At that point, you might do a little repair or restoration of that asset and restore it again. But I just wanted to call your attention to the difference in condition curve for green and gray, because your life expectancy for those assets is probably going to look a little bit different. Next slide. So there are a lot of ways to track condition over time. You can use any of these different kinds of scales. The advantage of a numerical system is that you can build it into an analytical formula for criticality analysis, which we'll get into next. It makes it a little bit easier to calculate if you're going to incorporate your condition into any formulas. But if it's not intuitive enough, you can also use condition scales like excellent to poor or A to E or F. Whatever makes sense. There's no standardized way of doing it, just what makes the most sense for you and your system. Next slide. And this is an example of a condition scale that we designed for bioretention swales and planters, and particularly the vegetative components. It's really important to track the assets condition in these clear preset ways. So you need to not just have the numbers, but also have descriptions so that if you have multiple staff going out and assessing condition of assets, that each of those staff will come to a similar conclusion about the condition of that asset. And part of having that kind of uniform condition across all your assets is having a set system with really clearly defined categories. Next slide. So let's talk about criticality or risk assessment for your system. It's all about understanding and determining the risk of an asset, risk for each asset in order to prioritize your activities that are most critical to your system. So how do you go ahead and calculate risk or the criticality of an asset? Next slide. We're going to look at a really simple but intuitive example of a criticality analysis for the function of skydiving, because I think that this is a pretty clear example of criticality analysis. Next slide. So instead of a water system or a wastewater system, our operation is skydiving. The assets that matter to us are the jumpsuit, the shoes, and the parachute. So those are our three main assets that we're going to be looking at here. Next slide. So looking at these assets, where do you think the most resources should be focused? Go ahead and click through so all those show up there, Casey. What do you think? Would it be the jump chute, the shoes, or the parachute? So think about that answer in your head, hold it in. Where should you focus most of your resources? Next slide. Right, so probably, I'm guessing that the majority of you picked parachute. If we don't have the parachute in the working order, the skydiver will die. So that is a pretty significant consequence, right? If his suit or his shoes don't work properly, he might be a little uncomfortable in the dive or in the landing, but is going to survive, right? So go ahead and next slide. What we did there is just an intuitive assessment of two different things. So one is the probability of failure. So what's the likelihood that one of those assets is going to fail? And then the probability of, the consequence of failure. So how bad will it be, right, if one of those assets does fail? Next slide. So we know all these things intuitively, and let's go ahead and plot these assets on what we would call a risk chart. So this is the kind of thing that we would do for each asset in your system, and then also the assets in your system as a whole. So go ahead and click there. So in this really simple case study, the consequence of failure of the parachute is the highest, right? That's why we have it in the upper right-hand quadrant. And we have this color gradient also to kind of help visualize what that risk might look like. So parachute is in the red because it's high probability of failure, high consequence of failure. Failure of the jumpsuit, we would maybe put that in the middle. It's moderate. The consequences is that it inhibits your ability to steer. And the probability is probably also somewhere in the middle, right? And then the shoes we would place low in both categories. Let's go ahead and click again. So I've placed the parachute in the upper right, but we could potentially adjust the probability of failure of that parachute, right? So one way to address the probability or to reduce the likelihood that the asset is going to fail might be doing routine maintenance on your parachute, right? And making sure that you're checking everything before you go out and jump. So if we do routine maintenance and we're really careful about that, we could probably reduce the probability of failure. Still really high consequence if it does fail, so we can't really move it from there, but we can move it into that slightly lower risk category. Go ahead and click. Awesome. So one way to reduce the consequence of failure, you can't reduce it for one asset, but the thing that probably a lot of systems already know about is creating redundancy within your system. So one way to reduce the consequence of one parachute failing is to have another parachute on deck. So that might look like carrying two different parachutes. You pull on one, doesn't inflate, but it's okay. The consequence is pretty low because you have this other parachute that's going to help you compensate for that. So just a really quick example of that. Next slide. So let's think about these concepts in relation to green assets. Mortality is the most common failure mode for gray assets, so kind of just overall failure. But most green assets will degrade kind of slowly over time rather than completely fail. And it's usually more of a level of service failure rather than a failure due to mortality. So mortality and degradation of green assets can look like death of the vegetation, could look like invasive species moving in, could look like a blocked inlet, debris clogging a drain, sediment traps clogged, compacted soils that prevent infiltration, irrigation access caps missing or damaged. This is a photo I took also of an asset in Tucson, and I sent this to their asset management program, and they were like, "Oh, yeah, we haven't checked on that one in a while." And I was like, "Yeah, it shows." They generally do a great job of maintaining their assets, so I was pleased to find a negative example in there too. But that's something that's what it can look like. This green asset needs a little help. For permeable pavement, could look like clogged joints or pores, could look like ponding, deteriorated under drains, this kind of thing. Next slide. So factors that influence the probability of failure of permeable pavement, so things like low levels of preventative maintenance, construction, could be weather, like if you're in a freeze-thaw cycle, probably not super concerning for North Central Texas. Traffic and the type of load and traffic that is exerted on nearby roadways or on the permeable pavement itself, and also the location of that asset. So design is really important here as well. Next slide. And then if we look at the consequence of failure, right? So if you have a clogged paver, you could cause flow into private property, potentially damaging people's property. That's usually a pretty serious one. Financial impacts for the required repairs. You could be seeing closing or restricting of roadways and parking lots. Could be causing a tripping hazard for pedestrians and other users. And it could also result in a loss of public support or confidence in your ability to manage those assets. So, you know, it's really important to consider what consequence of failure might look like for each of those green assets. And this is just kind of a list to get you started thinking about that. Next slide. So another core component of asset management is life cycle costing. And life cycle costing in accounting terms is just the process of compiling all the costs that an asset will occur over its entire lifespan. And some points to consider here, natural assets don't usually have the same kind of costs as gray infrastructure. You generally don't have to invest very much to purchase them or to install them. And they can also appreciate over time rather than depreciate. So that's kind of like that condition curve that we saw. Green assets can actually really improve over time and increase in their value rather than depreciating over time, the way that gray assets will often do. And calculating the cost for green infrastructure will generally require very site-specific planning and analysis because of that distributed nature of the infrastructure. So let's explore that idea a little bit further. Go ahead and click through. What does a green assets life cycle even look like? The stages are basically the same as those for gray infrastructure. They just look slightly different in practice. Next slide. So I'm going to kind of go through here, and if you could just kind of click through as I go, Casey, that would be great. So it's really important to consider that an asset's life starts way long before you put it into operation. When it's first being contemplated as an option, that's part of the planning or conceptual design stage. And that's a really, really important part of an asset's life cycle. Next slide. The next stage is design, followed by construction. So actually installing the asset. Once the asset's installed, it's ready for operation. And then the next phase of the asset's life cycle are those maintenance activities. How are you going to maintain the functionality of the asset over time? If and when the asset fails, the next 3 stages of the asset's life will come into play. So we have repair, rehabilitation, and then ultimately replacement or decommissioning of the asset. And depending on what kind of green asset we're talking about, that could look potentially like yeah, that's great. Thank you. Could potentially look like some kind of responsible disposal of any gray components, whatever you need to do to make the to return the site to pre-asset conditions. Next slide. So we like to use this graph on capital facility projects to illustrate why an asset's life begins when you start planning for it. Just got kind of a little visual here. So you can see this is a curve. We're looking at a kind of planning through operation phase of an asset's life. And the point here is that the influence that you have to make decisions about an asset, you can see it's the highest in the conceptual design and planning stage. So this is where you can make changes, you can try stuff out, you can talk to people, and you can make changes at relatively low cost. As you start to move into the next phases of an asset's life, your ability to make changes to the asset decreases while things start getting way more expensive to make changes. And that's when you get into the kind of land of work order, change orders and things like this. So it can get very expensive by the time you're operating to make changes on an asset. So just something to consider. Conceptual design and planning, super important. Go ahead and click through there. Yeah, and click again. Great. So operations and maintenance, huge consideration for the life cycle analysis of a green infrastructure asset. It requires a really different skill set to maintain a green infrastructure than gray infrastructure. And most only require really passive operation. So we don't generally have moving parts to worry about. Nothing needs to be turned on or off. And I'll also just say that we, as a probably country in the United States, are still in the early stages of determining the impact of maintenance on green assets. We know that it's really important, but we don't have a lot of the same we don't have the same kind of precision of recommendations that we have for gray assets, but there are some really good resources out there, and I'll be sharing those with you after the presentation here. It's important to consider that if maintenance is being done by an outside contractor, how is that data from the maintenance being tracked? How are you tracking that work? How are you assessing it and kind of taking that time to assess the condition of overall condition of the asset? How are we going to train those staff? Because usually this requires a very specific skill set. It's not just landscaping, but it's also very specific knowledge about plants and soil systems in order to keep these assets maintained. Things to consider. Next slide. So finally, we're going to look at long-term funding, touch on this really briefly. So in order to maintain the desired level of service, the lowest life cycle cost, that's kind of our point of asset management, right? As a system has to have a sustainable long-term funding strategy. Green infrastructure options are sometimes, there's a little bit of like grayness or like lack of understanding of sort of the value, how you value or monetize green assets in weighing or comparing them with gray assets. And there's also sometimes a belief that it costs more or is really difficult. But there's some really basic, I mean, there's just some particular ways to think about funding with green assets. So next slide. This is a graphic that we use for all types of water infrastructure, not just green infrastructure. It applies here as well. So internal funds like user rates, taxes, fees, municipal reserves are usually used to cover the day-to-day operations and maintenance of green infrastructure, which is also called O&M. So you can go ahead and click there. Great. And go ahead and click again too. Yeah, so this is, so that I would say that the internal funds, the O&M, is usually where green infrastructure is often neglected. You need income in order to maintain green infrastructure once it's installed. Sometimes this is a misunderstanding that you can just install it and walk away. It does require maintenance in order to continue functioning properly. And you need money in order to do that. But that's tricky because stormwater fees may not already be in place in the city or municipality that you're working in. So that can sometimes it's going to require a little bit of creative funding in order to make sure that the assets are being maintained. External funds, like those that are garnered through grants, loans, and bonds, are usually used to cover big capital projects. So the big kind of initial investment that you pour into getting an asset planned, designed, constructed, and kind of up into working order. Next slide. So the Tucson Storm to Shade program, just wanted to show you this quick diagram here. The Storm to Shade program has their funding for stormwater infrastructure separated into capital funding and then maintenance funding. I'll also say it's kind of important to note here for the numbers that $300,000 was the estimated maintenance budget for the Storm to Shade program when it was first proposed. Now that that program is operational, they've also invested an enormous amount of capital into installing green infrastructure, so they just have more assets in general to maintain. They're now more in the range of $500,000 a year for maintenance on those assets, and that is also a budget that's growing. And their program budget enables the fund to flow to either capital investment or maintenance investment. So there's not kind of hard lines between capital and maintenance in their funding programs as well. And also you can see that some of that capital funding is mayor's discretion, which is pretty common for these types of programs as well. Also, Storm to Shade has a utility bill fee. They charge 13 cents on average for a household, or it averages it out to about $1 per month for the average household. It's a little bit more for commercial users, but that's kind of what their fee looks like. Next slide. And I just wanted to throw this in here. Brooke Bushman from the Storm to Shade program said this during one of her presentations that she did with me in January. And I think that she's really spot on. So the type of planning for funding that we're talking about is really essential, and it has ripple effects into the communities where we're installing green infrastructure as well. If we don't make sure that someone at your system has the capacity to maintain these structures, what can happen is that they can place undue burden on the neighborhoods that have this infrastructure installed that then maybe fails or is non-functional. So maintenance planning and consideration is also making sure that your green infrastructure program is fair and equitable to the community that you're installing it in. Next slide. So for those managing green infrastructure, what does maintenance capacity mean? There are green infrastructure programs that lean on community members volunteering to maintain green infrastructure. I would say that this is not free maintenance exactly. Green infrastructure does require someone with specialized knowledge to make sure that it's properly maintained and repaired. So thinking about staff knowledge and capacity, in addition to just, do you have the money to pay people to maintain your green infrastructure as well? And then there's the systems component. So do you have a way to track your maintenance and your asset condition over time? That's going to help inform whether what kind of maintenance needs to be performed on the asset and by whom. Next slide. So just one last little example here from the city of Tucson. This is a case study that they on a piece of green infrastructure. So Tucson already had some green infrastructure installed in different neighborhoods before they had their asset management maintenance program in place. So the picture that you see on the far left is 2 years after an asset was installed. This is before they were doing preventative maintenance on their assets. And you can see that there's a bunch of grass here. All of this grass is invasive. It was clogging the inlets and causing pooling in that chicane, which is what they're called, or chicanes. It's basically an inlet outlet type of green stormwater infrastructure. So then after 2 years of preventative maintenance, that's the middle picture there, you can see that the invasive species are under control, infiltration was restored, and then there was kind of a big effort to plant some native seed to combat the invasive species. And then by April of 2025, 3.5 years of preventative maintenance later, you can see that the native seed plants are thriving. The invasives are under control, and then you can't see in this picture, but the infiltration capacity was restored to this asset as well. So it's just something to think about. Asset management, preventative maintenance, very important for green assets and their functionality. Next slide. So that's a rundown of the 5 core components. Important thing to remember is that asset management is a process. You just have to pick a place to start and then plan for how you're going to progress. And like I mentioned, this is a super condensed version of a longer training. You've got a taste for what asset management is, what it can do. If you want help getting started with it, or you want to take your skills to the next level with asset management, please feel free to reach out to us. We've been doing training and assistance on asset management for decades. Not me personally, but the people that I work with. We're working in asset management for about 5 years now. Our staff have loads of experience to support you on your asset management journey. So feel free to reach out to us. Next slide. And you'll have all of these slides. Casey will share them, so I'm going to run through them quick. I know I'm kind of up against my time limit here. I'll just share a few additional resources that will be available to you as well. The Integrated Asset Management Framework is a really great resource. This is something that we developed at the Southwest Environmental Finance Center and really provides like an overview similar to the one I gave you today with additional examples, resources. We also have a green asset database with tons of different examples of assets and install costs, average maintenance costs, just kind of useful general information about green assets. Next slide. Also wanted to show you this green stormwater infrastructure asset management toolkit. This is another kind of framework toolkit that was developed. And this was by the Green Infrastructure Ontario Coalition. Really great resource. I won't say too much on that, except just check it out. It's really, really thorough and good. Next slide. There's also the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Operations and Maintenance Manual and Video Series. ARID LID, which is the coalition that I'm a part of here in Albuquerque, developed this manual. Also, our colleague, who's a practitioner of green stormwater maintenance, walks you through in a short video series a lot of different kinds of maintenance that you could perform on different types of assets. This is super useful maintenance information. Recommend checking it out. Next slide. Finally, I just wanted to highlight the City of Tucson Storm to Shade resources. If you're curious about some of the case study examples that you saw today, there's a lot more information on Tucson's website. So that's here. This is their particular green stormwater page, and you can check that out for any more information about their program. So that's it. Thanks so much for tuning in. Again, my name is Shannon Pepper. I work with the Southwest EFC. My email is right there on the screen. And also just wanted to give a quick shout out to the City of Tucson, Storm to Shade. They're awesome. They're doing great work. If you have questions, you can also reach out to them. They're really on the forefront of something really cool with green infrastructure asset management and are a wonderful resource. So thanks. Thanks, everyone. Looking forward to the next presentation.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Shannon. And just a reminder, we will have a Q&A session at the end, so just hold your questions. I see some of them in the chat already, and we'll get to those after our next presentation. And so I'll go ahead and introduce the next speaker, Fouad Jabber with Texas A&M AgriLife. So Dr. Fouad Jabber is a professor and integrated water resources management extension specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, located at the Texas AgriLife Research and Extension Center at Dallas. He has been conducting research and extension programs related to green stormwater infrastructure, nature-based systems, stream restoration, and climate change resiliency studies since 2002, with funding to his program exceeding $3 million. He has published several refereed journal articles, conference proceeding papers, in addition to extension publications and government reports. Dr. Jabber is a registered professional engineer in the state of Texas. He has received the 2016 Standards Development Award from ASABE, the 2014 Blue Ribbon Award, the American Society for Horticultural Sciences Southern Ribbon, and the 2011 Blue Ribbon Award, American Society of Agricultural and Biological Engineers. Dr. Jabber will present on green asset maintenance methods utilized in the city of Dallas and BMPs, such as bioretention and permeable pavement. He will also discuss the recent Community Green Asset Management Program. Fouad, whenever you're ready.
I am ready. Thank you very much. So a little bit of my presentation is going to be a repeat, but since she presented so much information, I think it's going to be beneficial to all of us to hear a little bit. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the asset management that we did in the city of Denton, not the city of Dallas. And so starting here, so I'm going to just let you change these slides. So next slide, please. Very good. So just the definition again of asset management in general for all gray and green is basically a method to inventory, check on the conditions, service level, and the useful life, and estimate the cost of repair or replacement of a certain system. So that helps to decide where, when, and how to spend your money to keep your assets going on. Next slide, please. And this is, again, just as I said, a repeat, it's a different angle. So maybe if someone couldn't follow the linear approach that was presented earlier, we have here a circular one. And so basically, you have your asset, the current state of the asset, how are they working, what's their condition, the level of service, and we're going to talk about these. She already talked about them a little bit. what the criticality, what are the critical assets, the minimum life cycle cost, and finally a long-term funding plan. And I'll address those a little bit on how we try to build a manual for asset management for the North Texas area that EPA was mostly working on, although people from the COG, myself, the Corps of Engineers, and other groups were working on it also. So next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. So basically, one of the things that we have noticed here in the North Texas area, that most of the green infrastructure that was built by cities was either a grant that they received and they built it, monitored it for a couple of years, wrote a project, final report, and then they turned it over to their parks department. Usually it's the stormwater department or the engineering department that does that initial work. They turn it over to the parks department without any guidance on how to manage these. They're not looked at as assets. They're looked at as something to test and obtained for maybe aesthetically improving systems or meeting a certain requirement for watershed protection plans or TMDLs or something like that. And then what happens is that immediately as it's transferred to another department, these assets fail because of no knowledge of management and no approach to actually maintain them or have money in the budget to maintain them. So we looked at the concept of green asset management. I think we were working in parallel to the Southwest Finance Center as they were developing their manual. Some of them actually were involved in this. We had a couple of their employees fly in, and their director was involved in many of the meetings that we had in order to develop this methodology. And so specifically, we were concerned with the first two parts of the analysis, which are, again, the condition and the level of service of these systems. Next slide, please. So in order to come up with this condition or of the asset approach, we developed a methodology to develop your own inspection forms. And so what we did originally, we went online, downloaded a couple of standard inspection forms that were basically developed by the University of New Hampshire. And we took those and we decided to test those on green assets, mainly bioretention areas and permeable pavement that were found in the Denton area. Denton had gotten a grant for Hickory Creek, where they installed many of these bioretention areas, but they also had a few permeable pavement systems. They also had a project that wasn't related to the grant where they put rain gardens and permeable pavement on Hickory Street just off downtown in that area. And so the way we went about developing this approach was first we toured all these best management practices. They were, or that's what BMP is here, or GSI, Green Stormwater Infrastructure. And there were around, I want to say, 12 or 13 at the location. And so we inspected all of them and selected 3 or 4 that would be the target of our project. And then, as I said, we downloaded some inspection template from the University of New Hampshire. And of course, what we started doing is going regularly. Basically, if I remember correctly, once every 2 weeks, we went and filled that form and then added notes on it, corrected these forms, and then 2 weeks later, with the corrected forms, we went and did the inspection again. And then we had further comments. And we did that around, I want to say, 7 or 8 times until we had forms that we were satisfied with as a result. And then once we we looked at those, validated them, asked other people to look at them, and felt confident that they're good enough, we adopted these as forms that should be used in the North Texas area. So of course, the one in New Hampshire, they had some that relate to freezing. There were questions that we thought were not very clear, not very understandable. And so once we had these final inspection forms, we went and assessed actually or added an operation and maintenance management that for each one of these failures. And though we added those on the back of that inspection form, so now the city person, the inspector that's using it, as they're rating the system and putting a note why, for example, the inflow is clogged or why is the inflow not working, and he can go back to the back of the page and identify operation and maintenance or fixing solutions to each of these failures that he identified as he's doing it. And so we added all these operation and maintenance practices. We went a couple of times to the field and looked into whether they actually match or would solve the problem. And then we had a final meeting where we evaluated the process that we did and basically finalized the forms that were eventually submitted to EPA, and they included them in that final report that we developed for this project. Next slide, please. So I don't know if you could, I guess you can't see those very well, especially if you have a small screen, but I'll go through them a little bit. So these are the forms that were developed. So basically, we went through several potential problems that bioretention would go through and removed the one that were not relevant to North Texas. And we came up with 7 main categories, and under each category, there would be 3, 4, or even 5 in this case, systems. And so I can look at some of these, you can't read them. I'll read them. So there's one, is there evidence of standing water after 72 hours of a storm? Is there short circuiting? Is there signs of erosion that the flow is creating a channel and going from the inflow to the outflow? Is there accumulation of sediments? Are the overflows closed or open? So once we went through those, and then we gave them a ranking from 0 to 3, 3 being the worst condition and 0 being a good condition, and you can grade those and you would get a score. Now, when we did it the first time, this is one of the corrections that we were looking at, we had one of these bioretention that scored amazing. It had like the greatest grade on the system, but actually the inflow system was completely broken. And so actually that bioretention was not really working, but it scored great because the only low grade that it got was the overflow bypass inlet is not functional. But that actually resulted in the whole system not functional. So we went back and we added a weight for different practices that we think are actually disqualifying, basically. And so we gave a 3 weight for if there's standing water after 72 hours, that means your rain garden / bioretention is not really working correctly. So we gave it a weight of 3. The overflow, if it's being bypassed, at a weight of 3. And the inlet and the outlet right here. And then if there's blockage, of course, the weight became 3. And also, if the surface is not very level, we gave that a 2 weight. And so that actually fixed one of the main problems that we were having with this scoring, where some non-functional rain gardens were actually getting a good grade. And so right here, then you would, based on what grade you get, and these actually were also created in Excel format, where you can go back to your office, you can fill it in the field with a pen, but then you can go back to your office and put these numbers. And then as you put these numbers, you get a percentage of success. And so if you are within 90 to 100, that basically is a functioning system that needs routine maintenance. If it's scored between 46 and 90%, that needs attention, and then there's a specific maintenance to fix the problem that is needed. And then if it scores below 45%, then you have actually urgent repairs or even full replacement. And then when you turn the page over, some of the problems that would be solved, the types of maintenance that are needed are listed here with the frequency that is needed. So these are mostly the routine ones. So here's the score of 0. As I said, 0 means that it's doing great. 3 is bad. That's basically what it is. And so if you're getting these high scores, then you can look at the specific maintenance listed here that would address the problem. And some of these could be, this is not addressable and needs a lot of system. Now, the other thing you can do here in order to address the cost of maintenance, the minimum life cycle cost, is as you go back to the office, with time, maybe the first time you need to do some work, call some different groups to estimate the amount of money that you need to do these different solutions to these problems. But once you have a list of the cost, then when you go back to your office, you can estimate actually the cost of maintenance or repair that is needed for that bioretention based on these different repairs that are required in based on your form. Next slide, please. So we did the same work for porous pavement, mainly because porous pavement and bioretention/rain gardens were the main practices available in the city of Denton. And then you can see here that the main difference is, of course, the type of things you want to inspect in rain gardens versus porous pavement. And so here we're looking at, does it control the runoff? Is runoff coming from other areas into your bioretention? Is there signs of erosion around your, not bioretention, your porous pavement? We do have, if you have an outlet and a catch basin in the permanent pavement, is it clogged or not? Is there evidence of deterioration of the material? Is the space in the permeable pavement, especially if you're using interlocking concrete block, but you can also do it if you're using porous concrete, porous asphalt. You can see if there's sediment fitting in these porous spaces on the surface of your bioretention. You could also do a water test as you're there and see if you have areas where water is ponding and not infiltrating, and then you can score it. We also have in the other one too, we have, is there signage that's showing and telling people what it is and what it needs to be used for, and is there weed control, because as you know, weed does grow through these open spaces in porous pavement. So same thing, again, we have activities and maintenance or solution to the deterioration that are recommended. These could be a routine that happen once or twice a year, but also they could be solution, urgent care required, or a decision that this system is completely done and needs to be replaced. Next slide, please. The additional thing that we did is that recognizing that the people who maintain or include even the inspectors themselves might not have a good understanding of what are native plants versus what are weeds. We developed some of these forms that that they could use to know, like when you go, one of these inspection items is like, is there native plants growing in them, or are they being taken over by invasive species? And so you could have this form with you, and then based on those, identify common weeds that we have found in these rain gardens, bioretention areas, or growing through the spaces of the porous pavement. So there are these forms. Of course, there can be more, but these were preliminary. We looked at what are the plants that we have in our bioretention systems here, and had a comparison. So the person knows, well, most of these plants are actually native, or maybe some of these plants are invasive that were not planted and need to be taken care of as a result. Next slide, please. So here we are. These are our form. This is myself here, Joetta from the city of Denton. We had, I think this is a Southwest Finance Center employee right here. She was visiting us at the site. And this is the guy from EPA that was the project manager. And here are some tests that we did. We tested the infiltration in the system to see if the infiltration rate is acceptable. This is double ring infiltrometer. This is me. I only work when there's pictures. So you can see that I knew they was taking pictures. So I started filling water. No, I'm just joking, but this was my infiltrometer. So we used it. We evaluated if these systems were infiltrating at the design rate that we needed. And these are these forms as they started, and we put comments. We did an evaluation. We're like, there's no analysis of the invasives here. Some notes that were taken, added in the system, and in order to finally get these final inspection forms that I showed you at the previous slide. Next slide, please. So once you have basically you've decided on your the condition of your assets and whether they're doing work, there's the criticality, and we've had a lot of Shannon had talked a lot about the criticality and gave very good examples. I did want to just do what we considered here for criticality, things that we wanted to look at. And then so here you have you can have a table like this with all your assets listed here. And then for criticality, what you do is basically score it, give numbers what are the consequences of failure. She talked about some of these, but some examples that could be seen there is if the asset, for example, is on a main street, like the ones on Hickory Street, then actually even their appearance, even if they're infiltrating amazingly, but if they look completely dead and terrible and have result in negative reaction from the public, then that's a high consequence of failure. So therefore, for example, the one that are on the main street would have a higher grade for failure, including just the failing of the survival of the plant would have a high score on that, as compared to the same practice that we put at the wastewater treatment plant in Denton, which is one of the rain gardens that we evaluated. And so that one, if for some reason some of these plants are not looking amazing, that's not necessarily as high of a reaction. The second thing is the flooding areas. So in a lot of these places, these rain gardens and a few of the parks, they were installed in locations that had clear signs of erosion and flooding. And then once these rain gardens were installed, it slowed down that water, slowed down that erosion, and reduced the flooding as a result. So if you know that based on different, so we had developed in another project, I worked with the city of Denton and EPA to develop a flood risk map for Denton County. And so you could use that and look at the location of your assets. And if they're in a very high flood risk zone, then you can give it a higher criticality score as a result. Other things that we also mentioned is that some of these were built with grants as a response to a TMDL or a watershed protection plan. So these are actually were funded as an implementation of watershed protection. So if you have any reason or funding for these assets in response to a TMDL or a watershed protection plan, then the failure of this system has higher consequences because your funder might be concerned as a result and question this. A lot of these contracts require at least 5, sometimes 10-year maintenance after they're built. So that will give you a higher potential. And so you can build this system, and then your criticality score here, the first column, could be a form of weighted average of these 3, and you could think of other 4 or 5 other parameters to look into that are specific to your area. So that would be a way to do that calculation. Next slide, please. So minimum life cycle cost, we again, Shannon talked a lot about this, so we got, but this is stuff that I got from the AASHTO, ASHTO, I guess, Transportation Asset Management Guide. And basically, there's 3 questions here that would be beneficial to ask yourself when you're doing that minimum life cycle cost assessment. Is like, what are the alternative strategies for operation and management and personnel and the capital budget account? So basically, like she mentioned, that there are things that you can do from your small account, others that are capital project. How many years is it going to take? Are you going to need more people to do the inspections, or can you subcontract that? What's the funding for that system? The operation and maintenance, as I mentioned, most of the green assets here in North Texas are really just do not have special operation and maintenance. They're like, again, there's a couple of rain gardens that were built as part of a TCEQ 319 grant, and once that grant was done, the responsibility for operation of maintenance was transferred to the Parks Department without further information. And the next day, the mowing contractor went in and mowed all the native plants, and continues to do so till today, because it was not added as an asset in the system. And so with that, if you are going to add these green structures to your assets, then you need to start looking into an operation and maintenance budget that's different from your standard mowing contractor for the parks. And whether that exists in your system or less, maybe you could cut a portion of the mowing contract and use that money for specialized operation and maintenance. Mainly just looking, we looked at those in the inspection forms. They're really once a month, once a year, twice a year practices, some weeding, identifying native versus invasive species. So it's a different type of maintenance. It's not more expensive. It's probably cheaper and less frequent, but it is a different type of maintenance that needs some training and some understanding from the field crew. Another question you can ask for yourself is, what are the strategies that are the most feasible for my organization, right? And that comes back again. Do I contract it? Do I contract the inspection, or can I use my own staff to do the inspection? Do I train people for O&M, or do I require that training from my contractors? All these are questions that you can ask yourself in trying to assess your minimum life cycle cost. And then you should have, as I mentioned, when you go back to your office, with any maintenance practice that you have mentioned in your inspection forms, you should be able to assess and identify a cost that's probably specific to your area, right? So knowing your contractor, how much will it cost to do this, and then also go all the way to the cost of replacement of these critical assets. How much would it cost to completely rebuild that rain garden because it's completely destroyed? And so have that cost. And so once you have these costs, as you're going through your analysis, your asset management approach, it would be easy to understand these, because then that's going to help you with your long-term funding as a result. Next slide, please. That's the long-term funding, and again, we did address this. There are good resources that she showed you. There's another resource here, the EPA Asset Management, a Best Practices Guide, that was in 2008. That's, again, it is for it's mainly for gray asset management, but these sections do apply to everything. Again, is what is the funding available? How do we need to plan for maintaining these systems? How do we need to plan for the replacement after understanding the life expectancy of your best management practice, your growing stormwater infrastructure, and how to integrate them in your full budget. Next slide, please. This is the conclusion of the first part. We have a second part that I want to talk about. And again, it was mostly another angle to what Shannon was talking about. But basically, we really believe strongly that, and I know many of you here in the cities, because I've worked with a lot of you guys, do have green assets in the city. And it's really important that you look at these green stormwater infrastructure practices as assets, integrate them. Some of the cities here all do use green asset management software, and so a lot of these software now allow for you to add green assets in the system, and some of them allow you to add your own inspection form, so you can use the one available here. I do have copies of these in PDF that I will send to Casey, so he can maybe add it to the package he sends you with these presentations. So you can use these and integrate them in your software. But if you don't use the software, again, it is a method that doesn't need a software. Software is good for large cities that have hundreds and hundreds of assets, maybe Dallas, Fort Worth, maybe Denton. But smaller cities, if you have a limited number, an Excel file would do as great as that, and you can use that method to integrate your green assets with your gray assets, and at least have that for looking when you're looking at long-term funding for the system, as well as short-term operation and maintenance funding for these systems. Next slide, please. All right, so inspired by this green asset manual that we were working on, and that methodology to develop these inspection forms, I wrote with a professor in Texas A&M called Dr. Wendy Jepson. We wrote a proposal to NSF, which is a lot in the news lately. We wrote a proposal to develop a parallel approach that would involve citizen science instead of these inspectors that are technicians that are looking at the engineering of the system. We thought that the large adoption of green infrastructure at a city scale requires more involvement from the homeowners and the residents in order to have a sense of ownership for these practices, and as a result, encourage the more adoption of the system, but also make sure that the city is doing its job in maintaining these systems. Next slide, please. And so we were looking at the regional vision. We had the grant was a very short-term grant. It was a 6-month grant, as you can see here, from October to April 2023, to do a small pilot project in the city of Denton. And then eventually the view was to see if we can get more funding, which we didn't get, to do an application DFW-wise and maybe beyond. But so the first thing we did is we organized a community science working group. So we selected several people that would give us scientific advice and hear our ideas and give us feedback on the if we'll go on the right track or not. And then we did 3 workshops for local stakeholders, and we developed this. It says CGAM here, but it's the Community Green Asset Management Tool. So we worked with these to develop a community green asset management tool. And basically any citizen, I'll show you in a second, can go and have these forms, but not the inspection form I showed you earlier. These are specifically tailored to the stakeholders. Actually, we started with general broad ideas, and in the first workshop, we had the stakeholders themselves refine the questions to create this tool that basically any citizen walking, whether they know that this rain garden improves nitrate, phosphate, reduce runoff or not, can still fill it. Like, does it look good? Does it do you understand? Is the signage correct? Is the signage helping you understand what this asset is? And so you have these forms that are targeting the stakeholders parallel to the technical inspection form, but they're citizen inspection form that actually are shared on a hub that is available for the city to look at. And as it can be an additional layer to green asset management that adds, the views of the citizen and their interest. And you can understand based on that which are of these assets are actually being more visible, which one are the ones that the citizens are very interested in. And so the ultimate goal is to increase the feeling of ownership of the communities and connection to green assets and green stormwater infrastructure, and as a result have more adoption and more projects that have these systems that would reduce flooding as well as improve water quality, specifically in this case for the city of Denton. Next slide, please. So again, we tried to parallel the asset management approach and basically have these 5 points. The condition, the criticality, the minimum life cycle cost, and then eventually the long-term funding in this system. But really, the most focus was because of the short term of the project, 6 months. Mostly we were able to put a lot of focus on developing these inspection tools and integrate them and test them, having a lot of the stakeholders that were mostly volunteers that volunteered to be part of this. We talked with the city, with an UNT that advertised this project to their students and staff. And then we also went and talked with master gardeners and master naturalists, and many of them volunteered to be part of that group that would like to refine and test that community green asset management tool. And so by having these people's involvement, we were able to reflect the local concerns and priorities of the citizens, and really had a better feel of values that people assess to associate with blue-green infrastructure or green stormwater infrastructure. Next slide, please. So here's the hub that we developed eventually, and I was considering clicking on it, but I think we'll skip that point. But once you get that that slide, you can click on this link, or you can just copy it and put it on your in your browser, and it's going to take you to a website that shows how it gives you a map to select green infrastructure, or if you see green stormwater infrastructure and it's not on the map that is provided in that hub, it will you can actually add it as a result, and then it will take you, if you click in, put your name, it will send you to that questionnaire form that you can look at, and then eventually fill it up and submit it, and then it becomes available for other people. So when another person comes and sees that, they can even select that same asset as a result, and then either fill and they can fill a new questionnaire. All that data comes to us, and it's shared directly with the city of Denton, and they can take it into account when doing their full green asset management scoring and decision on which ones to maintain and where to put their money. Next slide, please. So here it is. You can see that platform, the hub that I was talking about. And when you go to click on that link, you get this first page here with a little bit of explanation. And then it says CGAM Survey Tool 1.0. You click on that one, and that's the one that's going to take you to this next screen here where you put your name, and then you can zoom in and either click on an existing green infrastructure, or you can add one as a result. And then down here there's a next button that takes you to that questionnaire. You can fill it up, add your information, and in reality it's not limited to Denton. Right now the existing blue-green infrastructure or green stormwater infrastructure practices are mostly in Denton, but as mentioned, you can add some and comment on them. And so if you have time later, you can do that. And then the hub has beyond that tool. So we just added it to the hub that was developed for other projects that include some community citizen science project. It has some educational modules on what is green infrastructure and green infrastructure maintenance. It advertises training workshops that are done by our group. This is in collaboration with the TWI, Texas Water Resources Institute. They have a group here that's based in the Dallas Center with me. There's also interactive signage, and then there's material specifically for K-12 or undergraduate students. These are all developed from different, these are not NSF projects. Most of them are TCEQ, or there's a couple of projects that were funded by the National Geographic, actually. And all that is on the hub, but specifically what we're talking about, you will see that CGAM survey tool. You click on it, and that takes you to that. And with that, 11:37, next slide. I think this is my here's my information. Hopefully you'll get it when these presentations are sent to you, but that will give us maybe some time for questions after that.
Yep, thank you, Dr. Jabber. So now we have roughly 20 minutes left that we can use for Q&A. I think we had some in the chat, but go ahead, and if you guys want to ask questions, you can field those this time. I guess perhaps we can start off with the question that was in the chat from Jennifer Spring. So I think this was from your presentation, Shannon. How much does this asset contribute to managing stormwater? How do you communicate the ROI on that investment to clients? It looks like it's the chicane. Yeah.
Is that the chicane?
Yeah.
I'm not able to see the chat, unfortunately.
Okay.
So let's see. Do you mind just repeating that question a little bit more slowly?
I'll go to the slide first.
Would
Okay,
it
great.
be better if I just asked it?
Yeah, that'll
Yes.
work.
Okay, sorry. So I work at an architectural firm, and we're constantly trying to push our clients to take on more GSI in our designs. And, you know, the cost of it and the maintenance is definitely a hurdle that we come up with. But like, you know, when you're trying to say, it's great to see what the maintenance costs and all the work that goes into it and being very transparent on that. But when we want to say what the return is on that and why it's worth the work, like, I'm just wondering if you have an answer for that, like specifically looking at this slide. We have really good data on all the costs and the work that goes onto it, but what is the return on the investment on that particular site?
Oh man, yeah, that's a really good question. And it's, I think, one of the kind of key hinging questions on how do we convince, how do you convince somebody who's trying to weigh the cost of installing and maintaining GSI with the benefits? I don't have I guess I don't have a precise example based on this slide. I would be happy to reach out to Brooke Bushman, who's the maintenance manager for Tucson, and ask her if they did a cost analysis of the benefits that if they actually analyzed the cost benefits of this project. Obviously, you can see there's the qualitative benefits of restored infiltration and restoration of the native plants, and then the lack of kind of the eyesore component of the invasive plants from the first slide. But it's really hard to quantify those benefits, right? And I think that that's a really important question. What I can do is also there's some really excellent resources out there. There are several organizations that have published guides to quantifying some of those co-benefits that I talked about. So things like improved air quality, community benefits, and some of those less monetary tangible things that do actually have a monetary value, right? So I can go ahead and dig those up, and I guess I can't participate in the chat, but maybe what I can do is send them to Casey, and then Casey can send them out to you all. Just some of those guides to quantifying some of the benefits. And there are some really good resources and calculations out there if you want to run your own cost benefit analysis for your clients. But yeah, also thank you for doing that work. It's really important to have. I also work with a lot of landscape architects as part of the GSI programs here in Albuquerque. So thanks for doing what you do.
So can I add a little bit to this too? So
yeah.
So basically, we did a lot of building. We're actually currently building 3 or 4 of these rain garden here and there, and the cost you find online is much higher than it can cost. Of course, it all depends on how you do it. If you just go the regular way and pay a consultant to go to do the design, and then it goes to different groups, that cost increases. But sometimes it's just a bobcat and bringing soil and plants and a few volunteers, and it can reduce the cost of these by at least 50%. But also I added a link to a study that I did with the Nature Conservancy and the City of Dallas. Susan, who's here on the call with the COG, was also working with the City of Dallas, and we did a study whether if we put enough green infrastructure in the City of Dallas, what would be the impact on flooding, and what would be the cost of doing that. And basically, we said every corner of a street where we can put one, let's put one. Every median of a parking lot, let's put one. And we ran a model, SWIM model, it's an EPA SWIM that evaluates flood and runoff. And what we found was that if we do actually go with green infrastructure wherever it's possible, we can have very close reductions in flooding as to replacing these old stormwater network with big pipes. And then by putting these systems, it was a 1/5 of the cost. So per gallon of water captured and forced to infiltrate, we reduced the cost was 1/5 of having a capital project that replaced the smaller pipes with bigger pipes that would take care of that same flooding amount. So there actually could, when you look at the big pictures, green infrastructure is cheaper. And then if you think about it, like with the climate change, as our storms are increasing in size, if every time you want to change the pipes, that's going to be a huge cost. But if you just add a few of these in your watershed, you're actually slowly meeting the increase in the intensities of the storms with a small, little distributed project as compared to having to wait for a longer time and then replace the big pipe. So there is, and this is straight water to water. If we add the ROI on improved aesthetics, improved water quality, improved air quality, and eventually health, the benefit and the ROI from these green stormwater infrastructure is really huge as compared to just replacing gray infrastructure.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And we did have a question on here from Julian to email those links. So any links that are in the presentation, that will be included in the follow-up. And then Shannon and Fouad, if you will just send me any links that you referenced, I can include those as well.
Yeah, I sent you a couple there, Casey.
Okay.
Both from the Center for Neighborhood Technologies. They have both a guidebook and a calculator, actually, I remembered, which could be really helpful for those initial, just kind of the planning and design phase of calculating the return on your investment. So yeah, good question. Thanks.
Awesome. Any other questions for our speakers?
Yes, this is DJ Brower. Going back to the original presentation where you had that example from California for a wastewater treatment pond, how many acres is that pond in nature reserve versus, say, trying to do the South Mesquite wastewater treatment plant that has to treat 183 million gallons of water a day?
Great question.
Is that even possible?
Yeah, let me go ahead and I'll send Casey another link to send you on the Arcata wetlands example. I don't remember off the top of my head how many acres that is. But they do have a lot of information online on their website, and I'm happy to send that along to you. Are you considering incorporating wetlands as part of your treatment system, or do you have that already?
We don't, because most of our issue is we have to meet TCEQ, outfall, BODs, and other criteria. And it's very difficult to measure that when you outfall it into a pond or a wet area that's in a middle of a creek that's always flowing. So how do you show that you are meeting the water quality requirements unless you have a actual point of discharge that you can take stuff from?
Yeah. So I can say that Arcata definitely does. So they have a distinct outfall location where the water, so the treatment system, if you can visualize it, is sort of like you've got primary, secondary treatment here, and then the water kind of is sent through a meander. So it kind of like the wetlands are sort of these different stages in like a little path that the water follows. And then there's the outfall point into the Arcata Bay, and that's the point that is measured for. I believe that that's the point that they're taking and reporting. Although I think that they're also they're measuring like what's going on with the water after secondary treatment as it enters the wetlands, but I don't think that they're reporting on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's just that typically our riverine type systems don't make for that type of environment, and land is valuable and is getting more valuable. We are developing land on, people want places to live, and we don't have the land area to do a lot of the green stuff that people want or would like to do for it. So we are having to make sure we handle our stormwater, our water systems, our wastewater distribution systems in as minimal an area as possible and make it as unobtrusive and out of sight and out of mind as possible. And that's a conflict with this green infrastructure that people are proposing. And I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah.
Can I
I think-
comment on that? Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
of course. Go ahead, Fouad.
Well, a lot of these green infrastructure, I don't know if you noticed, they're actually integrated in stuff the people are designing now for really no purpose, like these or some unique, like one purpose that's not that high, like islands in parking lots. That's where rain gardens go. You're not using extra space. You're just converting it into a depression that capture water. Right, permeable pavement. We're talking about replacing the standard concrete that you use in your parking lot with permeable material, and so you're not using extra space. It's the exact same thing. Actually, by capturing these water in your the bioretention, that is the island of the parking lot or the right of way in front of houses, the medians of roads. Those are all spaces that were already used for green, except they were contributing runoff rather than absorbing it. And so by converting those into green infrastructure, you're capturing a lot of the water, you're storing water. It actually reduces the need for detention pond if you have a requirement for a detention pond in your system. So these are the small distributed system that are placed in spaces that are not taking extra space, except that they look good, so you don't want to hide them, like you were saying about your ugly gray infrastructure. This is green that looks that beautifies your parking lots, your roads, and is doing a primary job of cleaning the water and the secondary job of being aesthetic. With regard to wetlands, we have actually huge, big examples of those that you can go visit. There's the John Bunker Sand wetland that is in Seagoville that the North Texas Municipal Water District is using. There's small constructed wetland. The Tarrant Regional Water District have a large detention pond that they converted into a constructed wetland that changed completely the landscape of their headquarters as compared. It was actually an ugly ponding space that they tried to ignore, and now they take people on tours and they collect the environmental data. So these practices are actually intended to do what you were saying you're not able to do. They're intended to integrate into the development. That's their original name was low impact development. So you still integrate them into developments. You use spaces that are really redundant, that just to put one small tree that barely survives in the island of the parking lot. Now you're actually making it a depression and putting native grasses in it to absorb water. And so there's a lot, green infrastructure is intended to be in urban spaces, and even constructed wetland can be integrated in these urban spaces easily with very little space to take. Actually, as I said, it sometimes saves on the need for a detention pond, that if you are working for a developer, that's going to give you 1 or 2 houses more to build and sell. And that just the money from these 2 extra houses probably funds the majority of the green infrastructure you would integrate into your development.
Can I dive in on that? I love what Fouad shared. I'm of the same mind. I also know that there are multiple developers that are incorporating green infrastructure as an amenity into their properties, and they are selling at a premium. And so I think because of the cost, because as we develop, we've learned some valuable lessons locally. We can't afford to tunnel our way out of a huge concrete developed area. It's probably, we're at a point where we need to be looking at how do we build smarter than we've done in the past. We can't afford to tunnel our way out of a fully developed metroplex. And so as we develop, if we can preserve some of our green spaces, preserve that wetlands function, and slow down our urban flood pulse, we're going to be a lot better off in the long run. Additionally, newsflash, we may have water now, but it's coming in big spurts. We do have water supply challenges even in North Texas. And so by constructed wetlands, by constructing even rain gardens, if we are able to hold on to some of that runoff that is coming down from the skies, we're going to be better off from a water supply standpoint as well. And with that, I'll shut up and get off my soapbox. But
no, you said some really great things there, Susan. I really appreciate that. One thing that I'll add too, because I don't think we've talked about it yet during this presentation, is that some of these natural assets that we're talking about already exist, right? So there are also existing wetlands, existing streams that are doing the work already, and developing over them poses a huge risk to water quality. And probably we all know that intuitively, but I just also wanted to plug that you can manage naturally occurring assets in a similar way to integrated green and gray assets. So when we talk about asset management for green assets, there are also ways to monitor and maintain those natural assets, either segments of stream or existing wetlands, these kinds of things. So just something to keep in mind too as you're thinking about this stuff.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys. There was a hand raised earlier. We have time for maybe one more question. It's your last chance, guys. If not, just get in touch with me or our speakers and get your questions. But I guess if there are no more questions at this time, we can go ahead and conclude today. I want to just say thank you for everyone joining us today, and thank you to our speakers for your content. We really appreciate it, and I will send the follow-up, and you'll have these resources at your disposal at a later date. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting, and thanks everyone for the opportunity to talk to you. Very, very exciting things happening in North Central Texas. Really appreciate it.